Vice Chair Powell. Vice Chair Powell. The members of the board are assembled. Vice Chair Powell, I believe you're connected by phone. The members of the board have been assembled.
Nope.
It's our technology test. We're going to just reconnect him.
Hello?
Vice Chair Powell?
Yes.
Okay, the members of the board are assembled. You can go ahead and proceed.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Steves. Good afternoon to one and all. I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Board of Regents. Let me first acknowledge that our chair, Dave McMillan, is absent from the meeting today, and I'm sad to report that Chair McMillan has been hospitalized in Duluth with a serious infection, and he is unable to be with us today. I know I speak for the entire board that our thoughts are with him, with Carrie, and with their family at this difficult time. Now, some might ask why the board is proceeding with this special meeting given the circumstances. And simply put, we've got an issue of great consequence before us today that's captured the passion and the interest of many across the university community. And Regent McMillan, in his role as chair, decided it was in the best interest of the university to have this matter handled at this time. And we're proceeding with that plan. The board's very engaged and ready for the discussion, so we've moved it forward as intended by our chair. Now, given that I'm participating remotely, I think it's in the best interest of the body and this meeting for us to appoint a chair pro tem. Robert's Rules of Order allow me to appoint another regent to serve in this role, and I've asked the immediate past chair, Regent Dean Johnson, to serve as chair pro tem, and he's agreed to do so for this meeting. So what I would like to do is ask for a roll call vote to affirm this appointment. And if there are no objections, Mr. Steves will take that role.
All right. Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Aye.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Cohen.
Yes.
Regent Cohen votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Johnson.
I think I should pass.
Regent Johnson abstains. Regent Lucas.
Yes.
Regent Lucas votes yes. Regent Omari.
Yes.
Regent Omari votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Aye.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Millen is absent. Vice Chair Powell.
Yes.
Vice Chair Powell votes yes. Vice Chair Powell, there are 10 yeses, 1 abstain, and 1 absent.
Thanks, Mr. Steve. So my appointment's been affirmed. Thank you, Regent Johnson, for serving as Chair Pro Tem for today's meeting.
Thank you, Regent Powell, members of the board, and I now call on Regent Powell.
You're going to make
Okay, I will do that. Before we move into the business before us today, I'd like to make a few comments on behalf of board leadership, which Regent Powell and Regent McMillan have been foundational in these thoughts and to provide a foundation for today's conversation. In March, we reviewed President Kaler's recommendations and heard from the co-chairs of the task force on building names and institutional history. We want to acknowledge the time and effort that went into researching and preparing that report by our outstanding faculty. The board is grateful for your work. Thank you as well to the students, faculty, staff, and senior leadership team members who invested countless hours in these efforts. After our March meeting, we heard from many of you, and I want to thank everyone, faculty, students, staff, community members, alumni, and citizens from across the state who reached out to provide us with your input. Although naming university buildings is solely the responsibility of the board, we must remember that consequential issues and decisions like these require the voices of our constituents in the process. The board values shared governance, but our model isn't always well equipped for issues like this one. The setup of this room, for example, is not conducive to a free-flowing shared governance conversation. To that end, we invite and strongly encourage the University Senate to convene an educational forum for the entire campus community, students, faculty, staff, this board, and the public, to come together to learn more about this university's history and how historical research is conducted. This conversation will help all us better appreciate our history and understand how context plays a role in our historical research. We have much to learn from our faculty experts on their work in this space. At our March meeting, Regents raised concerns over the recommendations and task force report and expressed a desire for additional context and information. I'm happy to report since then, many Regents have been engaged in thoughtful and productive conversations with student leaders and others about institutional history and how to move forward from the board's initial conversation. Regardless of the outcome of our meeting today, this conversation will continue, and everyone's voices are not only welcome, but necessary to move forward. People have very strong views on this subject, and today's conversation will be an inclusive one. In order to ensure that all voices are heard, I'm asking everyone to be respectful of time and in your comments. At a starting point, I'd like each regent to limit their remarks initially to 10 minutes. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you around this table for the time you've spent on this topic, including taking time to come together for this consequential meeting today. Now I'd like to invite Vice Chair Powell to kick off the conversation on the resolution. Regent Powell. By the way, Regent Simonson is also on the phone today. And Regent Simonson, Powell, if you indicate you wish to speak or ask questions, please speak up. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Johnson. So the first item we're going to consider this afternoon is board adoption of a statement on historical building namings. You all have that in front of you, but I want to highlight some of its most important elements. First and foremost, we commend the faculty for their contributions to this conversation and the greater ongoing discussion of our core values. We may have different views on the topic of renaming, but in my opinion, the thought-provoking work of the task force is solid academic inquiry. Our faculty are held in the highest regard by me and others on the Board of Regents. This board's disagreement over the President's recommendations that stemmed from the report should not be perceived as a divide between the board and the faculty. It's our hope, in fact, that the faculty continue this conversation across all of our campuses. Second, we all agree that the university engaged in discriminatory practices during our 168-year history, and we must accept the responsibility for these actions, just as we celebrate our successes. We cannot erase our history, and we must learn from it. Declining to remove the names on these 4 buildings creates a learning opportunity to acknowledge our complex history so that we make better decisions in the future. And finally, I'll note that the board's endorsement of this statement is a vital way for us to outline where we agree and how we move forward when we have vast differences of opinion. I know I speak for Chair McMillan when I say that the statement before us is a valuable reminder of the university's core values and how they help us determine how to look ahead in a positive way that respects the faculty and the university's students and other constituencies. So, Mr. Chair, to conclude my remarks, I move adoption of the resolution related to statement on historical building naming.
Regent Powell has moved the resolution related to statement on historical buildings and namings. Is there a second? Is there a second?
I second the
It's
motion.
been seconded. Discussion. Discussion, questions of the board in regard to the resolution. Any discussion? Any? Regent Hsu.
I'm not sure exactly how you're working this 10-minute thing, but I want to start out by saying that I am not going to support this statement. I think it's unnecessary. I think it's inaccurate, and I believe that while this process may have been put in place some time ago, the Regents really have only been engaged for a short period of time. And instead of kind of going through all the points I have at this point, I do have a lot of things to say about the rest of this process and where we should go from here. But I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to express that I'm not in favor of this motion or this resolution.
Regent Hsu, thank you. The reason I suggested 10 minutes was to make sure that all regions have an opportunity to speak. Will we hold fast, to that? If you have more to say, no. But it's a guideline, it's a parameter as we begin the meeting today, okay? Further discussion, comments on the resolution is presented by Regent Powell. Further discussion, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps this is the right time following Regent Hsu's comments. I believe we have available for everybody. I would move to amend the main motion to strike the language all after be it resolved that the Board of Regents adopts the following statement and include and substitute rather the language that is on the sheet that's being passed out, and I believe there should be some available to the public as well. And then I would ask if Mr. Steves would read it into the record.
Regent Rocha, let's refer to this as the A1 amendment or the Rocha amendment.
A1's fine, Rocha amendment.
Okay, the A1 amendment. Is there a second to the A1 Rocha amendment? Is there a second?
Can we see it first?
Yes, you can.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll second it just so we have it before us for this.
Very good. It's been moved in second. The A1 Rocha amendment is before us. Regent Rocha, you indicated you would like Mr. Steves to read it. Perhaps could you summarize it first? Just for context?
Mr. Chair, the only reason, and maybe Mr. Steves can help me out, if it's not in the original docket, I don't think that it's recorded for sort of future consideration. So by reading it into the record, obviously that's the best summary we can have, and then it would be in the record because it's not part of the formal docket. Is that right, Mr. Steves?
That is correct. It would not be part of the original docket. That is true. We would certainly retain records of amendments that are offered in the files of the board, but it's not part of the official docket.
And Mr. Chair, so just to clarify, for expediency, so would it rest with the original resolution, or the language of the original resolution? I mean, I just want to make sure that it's accessible, so if anybody wonders what was being said, it can't be misrepresented or otherwise cause confusion that way.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I'd have to check in exactly how we archive amendments that are offered, but we can certainly read it into the record, and that way it's there.
Okay, Mr. Steves will read the A1 Rocha amendment to the original resolution. Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, the resolution reads, or the amendment reads as follows. Regents of the University of Minnesota resolution related to statement on historical building namings. Be it resolved that the Board of Regents adopts the following statement. The University of Minnesota is dedicated to promoting the highest ideals and values of our society. The policies of the Board of Regents must reinforce the university's commitment to discovery and the search for truth with integrity, civility, tolerance, and respect for differences. Advancing diversity free from discrimination is a fundamental part of our mission as a land-grant university. Consistent with this commitment, the Board of Regents assesses the President's preliminary recommendation to rename university buildings following an extensive history. The project entitled A Campus Divided, Progressives, Anti-Communists, Racism, and Anti-Semitism at the University of Minnesota 1930 through 1942 presented evidence of anti-Semitism and racial discrimination across the United States, in Minnesota, and at the university during the period covered by the exhibit. Citing the material presented in the exhibit, the Minnesota Student Association presented a resolution and presidential directive calling for an examination of the actions of 2 university presidents and 2 senior leaders of that time. The Council of Graduate Students and the Professional Student Government have spoken strongly in support.
Excuse me, Mr. Steves. I think if you speak more into
Yep. In response to the exhibit and resolution, the President established a task force on building namings and institutional history task force to conduct historical research building upon the framework for the assessment of naming and renaming designed by the President's and Provost's Advisory Committee on University History, comprised of faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members representing all 5 system campuses. The task force charge focused on the role of the 4 administrators, and its report offered a recommendation to change 4 building names. The report further invited a discussion about discrimination at the University of Minnesota that runs counter to our institutional values. The task force reminds us that the education that comes from examining history is the most important value in the discussion. The task force's work opened up a vibrant campus conversation about the purpose of namings and how the evolution of society's thinking impacts the question before the Board of Regents. The issues at stake reach beyond namings. The question before us is not wholly centered upon the conduct of individuals. Presidents and other administrators act in context, including in response to the positions of regents as the evidence corroborates, and based on factors that can be left unknown when evidence is scant about matters that occurred long ago. Individual conduct often mirrors the best and worst of societal norms. When considering the actions of individuals, their beliefs, and their impact on the community, a process and standard are necessary to support the university's commitment to truth and fairness. Once individual accountability is determined through an articulated process and under a clear standard, evaluating that accountability against the propriety of renaming can begin. The university debate over these matters illustrates that adopting the President's recommendation for renaming is not the appropriate action at this time. The public policy issues before the board include the social, legal, and governance context of the time, and the lens of history sometimes leaves issues unresolvable. It is important, however, that the university recognize and acknowledge past discriminatory practices. All agree that we cannot erase that history. We must learn from it.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. Regent Rocha, further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, for those of you that are familiar with the original language, it's preserved heavily in this document. That was my intent, was to change as little as possible. However, having gotten input, having received input from other members and from my own perspective on things, there are portions of the original language that are, in some cases, premature, and in some cases are not congruent with where certain members, other members and myself feel the discussion is sitting right now. And this has been a challenging period for the university and for the board, and my sense is that our ability to have a statement that can be embraced by the broadest number of regents is really what a statement from the board is. I'm not familiar through history with many statements from this board that would have something less than near, if not complete unanimity. And so not having been consulted, and I don't believe I'm alone, I don't know how many of us were consulted in the drafting of the original statement, thus seeing it for the first time within the last couple of days. My intent in this is entirely to synthesize what I understand is to be agreement among our membership, which then, of course, does not prevent others from augmenting this language with their own statements and their own perspectives and beliefs. And that my hope in reaching out to the chair, in asking him to consider this language, and also if there were issues with this language, to engage in a dialogue to try to reach some common understanding and joint agreement, it was not accepted by the chair, and he expressed his intent to simply present the initial language about which I had raised some concerns. So my expectation is, and I'm certainly open to the conversation, and if people have specific items in this that they would seek to amend, I think that would be certainly appropriate. But I don't think that there's anything in this document that is in conflict with the broader language of the main motion, and I don't think that there's anything that would be inconsistent with what I think members of this board believe to be true. And so from that standpoint, I would urge my colleagues to support the substitute language, which then gets us into the next conversation and moving the university forward in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Further comments, questions on the Rocha amendment, the A1 amendment? Regent Simonson or Regent Powell? Appreciate you probably have not seen this language. You only heard the description and also read by Mr. Steves. Regent Rocha, could you summarize briefly, maybe 2 or 3 points that your resolution is different than the original resolution offered by Regent Powell? Just the 5,000-foot view of it.
Mr. Chair, thank you. That you should have seen this coming. The primary difference is I sought to take out as much of the subjective language as possible, where it's a function of how you feel about a specific document or a specific statement, in trying to get back to the stuff around which I have not heard disagreement. And so, for instance, in the conversation about the report itself, the task force report, one of the challenges is that the language in the original motion could be perceived in the future by some as adopting or endorsing the findings of the report. And there are some of us who want to have a continuing dialogue about the report and to get to a sense of what is accurate in the report and what may not be accurate. And I have, in this setting and in separate conversation with members of the board, shown things that I believe to be objectively inaccurate in the report. And so to avoid confusion for future generations, I think that it is premature at this point to be making statements of that variety that endorse the report before we have had an opportunity with the faculty and the university community to have that analysis. Because let's face it, for the last 2 months, we have not had that analysis. We've had work being done on trying to gather more information. Students have been involved in that to a limited extent. And so passing judgment by subjective commentary about that at this point doesn't seem timely, and I don't believe I'm alone in that concern. And I would like to find the place where we have commonality, and then we can build from there for the next phase of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments, discussion on the A1 Rocha Amendment? Regent Swigum, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members, you probably don't care where I am at in this. You'll find out in just a second, but I plan on voting for the Rocha Amendment. Should it fail, I plan on voting for the original resolution.
Regent Swigum, could you speak into the mic?
I think very strongly, members, that we, as a community of the university, need to move on, and we need to move on in harmony. I see nothing in the Rocha Amendment that I disagree with, and I need to vote on what's in front of me, and I will support that amendment for how it is written. I find it somewhat interesting, usually when you see a resolution and you get to the be it resolved part, you have definitive statements, you have definitive findings. And I think what bothers me, if anything, about the original statement is that it's loaded with questions for the future. It's loaded with, there's 6 or 7 questions there that are loaded for the future that I don't know exactly what the resolution is going to be. Be it resolved in a resolution means these are the findings. This is what we agree upon. This is the resolution. And I think that the Rocha Amendment handles that in a much more direct way rather than leaving open questions. So I'll be voting for the Rocha Amendment, and should it fail, I'll be voting for the original one, just because I think we need to move on.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Further comments or question in regard to the A1 Rocha Amendment? Further comments?
Regent John.
Regent Simonson, please.
Yeah, thank you too. I also would support the amended one, the Rocha amended one. I was not involved in drafting the original document, but I did provide comments to the chair after it was sent out. And basically my comments were real quickly. I think the second, third, and fourth paragraphs should have been eliminated. The amended one kind of goes there. Basically, to summarize my position, I want to focus on where we are now as a Board of Regents. Task Force did or didn't do. That remains for the future what would really need a lot of discussion. So I'm in favor of the amendment.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. Regent Powell, any comments from you?
No, Chair Johnson.
Further comments on the A1 Rocha Amendment? Further comments? A roll call vote has been asked for each of our votes this afternoon, members. So unless there is any further discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Regent.
Who called for the roll call?
Regent Beeson.
Oh, I did not hear that. I'm sorry.
He had in transparency had asked prior to the meeting that all votes be roll call.
Well, I got no problem with that. I just hadn't heard it. So.
Okay. Are you okay with that?
Well, if it's Regent Beeson, yes.
Okay, the secretary will take the roll call on the Rocha A1 amendment.
Regent Anderson.
No.
Regent Anderson votes no. Regent Beeson.
No.
Regent Beeson votes no. Regent Cohen.
No.
Regent Cohen votes no. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Johnson.
No.
Regent Johnson votes no. Regent Lucas.
No.
Regent Lucas votes no. Regent Omari.
No.
Regent Omari votes no. Regent Powell.
No.
Regent Powell votes no. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes.
There being 4 ayes and 7 nays, the amendment does not prevail. So we're back to the original Powell resolution before us, members of the board. Any further discussion in regard to further discussion on the Powell resolution? Further discussion. Regent Rocha?
Mr. Chair, I would like to speak, but having just spoken, I certainly would yield to anybody else who wants to speak at this time.
Anyone else wish to speak to the Powell resolution? Anyone else? You ready for the vote?
Mr. Chair?
Regent Rocha.
All right. Since I think Regent Shu, you've already spoken to the issue. We've got several items that are in front of us today, and there's a whole lot going on right now. And including with the students, I think even within the student body, I think that there are some interesting dynamics. We've had opportunities to meet with student leaders, and I'm actually very happy to see the students here in force today. I am going to make comments at this point, again, just not knowing what the flow is going to be as we reach these other more, I think, functional motions. I would hope to see this continued presence from students on this campus, whether we're talking about funding for mental health access, whether we're talking about accessibility and cost of the university. And so it's nice to see that that spirit still exists. There is a somewhat of a challenge for me, as some of the student leaders know, and of course it's a bit of a calling tree. You can only speak to so many people in this position when you have job and family and everything else, and this is an unpaid position, voluntary type. But I have been very pleased with how forthcoming student leaders have been in engaging this conversation and pushing back on different things. I invited the students of all groups on the Twin Cities campus to join in conducting some of the research. I was disappointed that when it came to getting down to the nuts and bolts of this and trying to understand the issue in its most specific form, only one person was troubled to come and join me. But I do appreciate that happened as we were looking at this data. There's also the letter, if you've had a chance to read it, from some of our student leaders, the student representatives. It's interesting because their concern in their last paragraph, the language says, over the past few months, the Board of Regents has discussed the lack of clear and inclusive process. Calling a special vote today to move against the highly discussed unnaming recommendation is a clear example of poor process itself. With the implication of this is a matter to be continued into the next administration, we encourage that there be no hasty decision made today, but rather continued discussion with the university community without undermining the task force. I agree. And that is actually one of the reasons why the previous language, or the language that's in front of us now, is problematic, because we haven't had that process. We haven't had that conversation. And certainly I understand when you sit in a public office of this variety and you've got, and you don't have access to a marketing department or a public relations expert to put your position out, you can be characterized a lot of different ways. And certainly the conversation about this matter will leave some of us perhaps with bearing the accusation, and certainly believed by people where that will be their only data point, that somehow we don't believe that discrimination or anti-Semitism that occurred at the university, and there's no question that it did, that somehow we think it's okay. There was a statement in the Minnesota Daily today, and we do read this, right, where it talks about the questions about the task force report. One of the task force members is quoted in the article saying that the questions about the report calls into question the entire moral structure of the university, and that needs to be addressed. These types of charges can't just be thrown around without a serious attention to the gravity of that charge. Well, the questions about the report don't call into question the entire moral structure of the university. They call into question the validity of certain statements and findings in a report. We don't even know who wrote all the parts of the report. I don't know, among the members of the task force, what each person thought his or her role might be. But we do know that there's a report, and the report makes certain statements. I have demonstrated on a couple of occasions to the board where something was characterized one way, but a clear reading of the actual document shows it is not a fair reading. There's a question about the 3 dental hygienist students, young Jewish women. Both the Campus Divided exhibit and the report provide that they were told to leave the program. But when you read the only piece of evidence about it, the young woman, in her own words, says she was told to stay in the program if she wanted to. She was never told she had to leave the program. I don't know how a mistake like that gets made, but it's a problem. There are other problems. You have questions about Dean Nicholson, with whom I have no relationship, nor with his family. And as I read into this, and as I looked at the documents, and as one of your fellow students joined me observed, the statements in the exhibit and the statements in the report purporting that he used anti-Semitic language is not supported by anything. There's not a single document that can be attributed to him where he ever expressed that kind of an animus. That's a problem. And if our faculty, who I respect tremendously, I'll bear that. Sometimes we show ourselves.
Please,
It clearly is.
we ask for respect from the audience, faculty, staff, and regents.
So
Regent Rocha?
I would gladly trade the derision for responses to the academic questions.
Send your questions to the scholars who have produced these.
Mr. Chair.
Members of the audience, please. We ask for
respect from the fucking board.
Mr. Chair, if I'll try to continue.
Regent Rocha.
This is good. This is good. This is reflective of my issue because I don't control the narrative. I don't control this process. And I reached out to our board leadership and I asked for the first thing for us to do would be to put in place a process and a standard. We did not give that to the task force. So, I feel badly that as I'm reviewing this report and trying to understand what is being put in front of us and why, that we're not operating with a common understanding with the people we asked to help us. And so before having any conversation like this one today, I wanted to have us put in a process with a standard that can be presented to the task force with questions, and that the task force would then have an opportunity to reply to that. And instead, certainly over my objection, we're sitting here today with a motion to direct someone to not do something. I don't understand that. That is foreign to me. That what we should have would be a motion to rename, at which point the board can decide whether the case has been made. But not having had that opportunity, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do at this point. I don't think that we're doing the right thing today from the standpoint that we haven't fully investigated the conversation.
We're done. Let's be done here.
So, with that, I will simply say my assessment. My assessment is that we clearly know that there were discriminatory acts. We know people were treated as second-class citizens during this period. That is not a question. The issue is what the role was of these individuals. We have not had an opportunity to fully vet that, to fully discuss it. And until we do, I don't believe we've made the case for renaming, in which case I would be compelled to not support it. That being said, the language that's in this resolution includes statements about the report that I am not yet prepared to make, and therefore I can't support it. Thank you.
Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. First and foremost, I want to recognize our faculty who worked on the task force, who worked on the campus divided exhibit, the students who worked on those documents, and the students and faculty and staff. I don't think I've ever seen a room this packed at a Regents meeting. And so I want to acknowledge that you all are here, and I appreciate the engagement. Lot of different directions we could go here. I don't even know where to start. But I'll just start with this. One of the reasons why the task force will not engage is because of our behavior at the March meeting. So I would not. People spent volunteer time like we do. They didn't get paid to put together the report. And in the way I observe it, they were attacked and have been actually since that meeting. And I'm looking directly at two of my colleagues specifically. And what I see this as is a group of well-trained faculty who have gone out and done a lot of research in which they can connect dots. And that's what they're trained to do. There's a team of them who discussed items, they discussed different documents, and then I see individuals who are looking for a silver bullet that says, did they ever say this or that? And the way that research works is that you go and you find and you gather information until you hit a saturation point where you see that there are things that can be connected and conclusions can be drawn. And I've seen something completely opposite from the members of this board. So if we have a serious problem with our faculty in the research that they do and say that they are academically dishonest and they don't know what they're doing, then we have a much larger problem, which is what I stated at the March meeting. And therefore, I think we might as well put forth a motion, let's cancel tenure and get rid of the faculty and we can do everything that they do. This, in my opinion, is absolutely absurd and counterproductive to our fiduciary responsibility as regents at the University of Minnesota. We have students who are trying to go out and get jobs now, and they've been accused of academic dishonesty. That is insane, absolutely insane. The behavior that we've displayed, in my opinion, is unacceptable. Now, to some of the things within the report, and I'll try to just mention a few of them. Specifically, number one, I want to make very clear that there were several recommendations in this task force document, one of which was to unname 4 buildings. I think most people, in particular the public, have completely forgot about that. This resolution that we have today, particularly the third one, actually is virtually directly in line with what the task force has asked and recommended, and the previous committee that was chaired by Dean Coleman previous to that. So I want to make that very, very clear. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we're not going to unname any buildings today. So going in that direction probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to even debate whether or not we should unname buildings, because we know today that's not going to happen. And I want to point out specifically to what Regent Rocha was just mentioning about the 3 dental hygienists. My reading of the section that you have commented on is providing contextual information about what's happening. And as I read that piece of it, particularly with respect to Dean Nicholson, it was in his section of the report to provide the larger context of what's happening within the university. Moreover, when we know that a person, specifically Dean Nicholson, has been proven to be a informant for the FBI and refers to leftists and communists, and we know based on the research, when you take several points and put them together, that Jewish people at the time were frequently referred to and almost synonymous with leftists and communists, you can draw some inferences from that. Now, in a legal standard, absolutely, you might be able to say, no, that doesn't pass. And I know you're a lawyer, and I think you're a good one. I mean, you're still working, right? Right? So I understand that might be the standard of evidence that you have. In this case, I just simply disagree with that. And then I'll try to wrap up here. I don't know how many minutes I'm in, Mr. Chair. I apologize if I've gone over. Y'all know this. I've said it publicly. I can't find a time where discrimination was ever okay. And the analogy that I tried to give, and maybe it was a poor one, is around slavery. Most people today might just kind of say, yeah, everybody was doing it. I mean, it was, you know, it was back in the whatever years, and slavery was common. And so it was okay. And I just have to think about the mother who watches her child being sold at the trading blocks. And I can't imagine that if you asked her if slavery was okay, she would say yes. And then I think about the contextual pieces where we say it was a different time and things were different. And as a black man, I have to wonder then how I would have been treated if that's what we're saying. That is just contextual. I think I'll just stop there.
All right, thank you, Regent Rocha. Further, Regent Omari.
He's not that good looking.
I'm sorry. Further comments on the Powell resolution. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Johnson. This is quite a raucous crowd here, and I wasn't going to say anything else, but I feel the need to respond to some of the things that have been said. So when we first started this process, I had, actually before the process even started, I think I had gone to see the Campus Divided exhibit. There were things in the exhibit that concerned me. I had asked that the board receive color copies of every panel in display. I've always been open to renaming under certain circumstances, yet we never put a process in place to describe how to rename. When the report came out, I submitted an email with questions on February 26th this year. One of the issues I raised was the fact that Sherman Dreyer was listed in the report as the first Jewish Minnesotan elected to the Board of Regents. He was not. In fact, he was a student. That was an error, and it was acknowledged by the people who wrote the report. I also listed a number of other questions. This is 10 days before the March 8th board meeting. And a couple days, I don't know exactly the date, Mr. Steves could probably help me, but we received an update because the report had been written or modified since we originally received our copies of the report. The original copy that the Regents received was 141 pages. And then the new report was 125 pages. That's the one that's out there today. And we received a 10-page document that described some of the changes that were made to the report since we had originally received it. On page 9 of that emailed document, it says, number 6, the outstanding questions from email sent February 26, 2019. I don't think the email was attributed to me, but this was my email. It says the co-chairs will be prepared to field questions 6A through 6G below and discuss task force historical analysis during the March 8 presentation, as well as limitations that came with their brisk deadlines. And then it says, even though some collections may already exist online, task force members began meeting and wrote most of the report within 3 months. Time did not allow for all collections to be researched. And that is a response to one of my questions about what they looked at. So I think a lot of people believe that the task force co-chairs who were here were ambushed on March 8th, but in fact they had 10 days to respond to questions. They chose not to. They chose to actually answer questions live in a 45-minute session that was way too short for the subject matter. Those of you who were here for that and witnessed that saw that we had to cut it short because Chair McMillan decided he needed to be somewhere else to give remarks at a luncheon. I think that was a mistake, and I think we should have had a better discussion with more time for everybody to participate. Now, as I said, I was not ever against renaming, as you know, a lot of the community members who I've heard from are just opposed to it, just to be opposed to it. I'm willing to look at the facts, and I've asked for the facts. And in the 2 months since our March 8th meeting, I've received nothing additional that I haven't produced myself or hasn't been produced by other regents here. In fact, we were told before the meeting that the board never acted or spoke on this particular issue. It was just that night, I believe, that Regent Beeson sent me a text, and some other regents a text with an online copy of the July board meeting from 1935. Now, the letter that I referenced in my remarks on the 8th, March 8th, was a letter dated August 1st, 1935, which made references to regents that was omitted from the report. Well, as it turns out, we have a bound copy of those minutes from 1935 that Regent Beeson found online the night after the board meeting. And clearly, in the minutes in the board meeting happened to be July 31st, 1935, which was the day before President Kaufman wrote the letter to the students that I read in that meeting. Now, how these things could be left out of the report, that's what I want to know. I've asked the question, I've submitted written questions via email, I've received a response that said we will answer in the meeting, and I just think we need to take a step back. I'm opposed to having this meeting today, but since it's a meeting to actually have a discussion as opposed to what's been occurring in the last 2 months, you know, I'm here to fully engage in this process. I brought a lot of stuff. I don't know what I'm going to use, but I believe that we have tried to make the best out of this process. And I'm not for passing this particular statement because I think there are some things in the statement that actually should be dealt with in, and may be dealt with in another resolution. For example, in the fourth to last paragraph on page 2, it says, the administration is also charged with developing permanent exhibits and other educational means to keep ever present the challenge of this university to do better. It's a great statement, but I think it actually is encompassed in another resolution that we're going to discuss later. And I think that, you know, we shouldn't be just charging the administration to do anything at this point because we don't have the facts yet. And I think we need to take a step back. I think we agreed to take a step back in March 8th to do more work. More work was not done. 2 months have been wasted. And here we sit. With the new president coming in, I just think we're spending way too much time on this particular issue when there are other issues such as the university's budget is going to be before us pretty soon, and we're going to have to start tackling that. But I think if we all spend as much time on the budget, we'd actually be able to solve some problems at this university. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Pro Tem.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Further comments on the Powell resolution? Further comments? Before I call on you, Regent Rocha, anyone who's not spoken yet wishes to comment? Anyone else? Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And normally I wouldn't take another statement, but in response to having been specifically mentioned in a colleague's comments, I want to just respond briefly to Regent Omari. First, in your recitation of what got us here March 8th and beyond, I think that the implication is there were words coming out of my mouth that I don't believe ever did. I'll just leave it at that.
I couldn't hear you. Could you say that again?
I said that there's the implication that words had come out of my mouth that never did from what you were describing, so I want to just make that clear. But in one brief shining moment of actually talking about substance, you referred to the historic analysis where there is as you're connecting the dots. I was provided that response that even though Dean Nicholson, which of course we still don't have an explanation for why there are quotations attributed to him that are not verified by any material, but that he actually, in his surveilling of students, that was a proxy for anti-Semitism. And so I proceeded to look into that as part of this process. Now, we do know that he met with the FBI. The report doesn't indicate what exactly he provided, what he said. So you have to make a leap to say that he reported certain students. We can assume that that would be within the conversation, but we don't know that for sure because there's not a clear record of it. But he does provide lists. He provides lists to Mr. Chase, and in doing so, it's not limited to Jewish people of Jewish origin or background. There are other people involved, faculty, students, and so on. And there's also evidence where he is talking, there's this abstract of minutes, and again, this is some pretty serious extension. This would obviously not be in a court of law. We know this is not a court of law. But in this abstract, it talks about Dean Nicholson talking with people trying to form a communist club. And Dean Nicholson asks the young woman who's presenting to the Senate, and I'm not totally sure what the makeup of the Senate is or how that was structured at the time, but he asks her why she has to use the name communist. And isn't this just an opportunity to get across the liberal perspective? Now, that's not a question he'd ask if communist was a proxy for Jewish, because changing the name from communist wouldn't make the people any less Jewish if his animosity is towards people of Jewish descent. So, in any case, he offered them the opportunity to speak at the forum. He offered them the opportunity to bring speakers on campus and that they can meet. But to get student status, they were asked to turn in their list of membership as other organizations were. And that was where they were concerned that they would be used to harm them. So that evidence cuts against the concept that he was using that as a proxy for his anti-Semitism. And certainly you would expect that if he was anti-Semitic in that way, there would be some record of him making specific comments or statements or ratifying behavior of that nature, and there just isn't any. And I think out of fairness, we should require some standard more than other people did it, therefore you share those traits with those people, therefore you are guilty as if you were one of them. I think that's somewhat of the prejudicial approach that gets us into this problem in the first place. So I want to take that opportunity to actually have that, because it may be the only shot we have, and sometimes certainly. But with respect to that, this is the conversation that I wish we could have in a more robust way, and what we're doing today prevents that.
Regent Cohen, please. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Pro Temp. I want to say that for the first time since I've been on this board in 12 years, I agree with Regent Omari. I mean, not that I have agreed with but I didn't mean to come out that way. That I too was embarrassed about the meeting and how some of my colleagues reacted to the report. I want to add that by not renaming, and I'm going to vote for the resolution, I am not saying that discrimination is ever okay. It is not okay. I am saying that we can learn, we can applaud the values that we have now and that we had then, and that we can see that progress has been made. We're an educational institution, and to me that's very, very important. I want to also mention how much I appreciate the work of the faculty. I've always believed in the integrity, the hard work, and the expertise of our faculty. I too met with, as many of my colleagues did, I've met with students, and I appreciate their interest, their thoughtfulness, and I listened carefully. I appreciate their interest in, if names are not changed, in reckoning with what was then and having some educational materials and so on. I do believe that it's time to move on. Not that we move on from this. It is our history. We need to talk about it and so on. But as we've said, there are many other items that we need to address. And so I'm glad we're having this meeting now. I think it's history. We're never going to know exactly what happened. We can learn a lot. And I am ready to take a vote on the Powell resolution.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Simonson, any comments at this point?
I agree somewhat with what Regent Cohen just said, Chair Johnson, and I never would accuse the task force of academic dishonesty. I don't really know where that came from, that terminology. Certainly it never come from me, and I'd never want to undermine the task force. But personally, I need a lot more information and a lot more conversation on the topic. Over the last few weeks, as I'm sure other regents have, I've received a lot of emails. Most of them were against renaming. All the emails were alumni. Many of them are involved in various activities in and within the University of Minnesota. I also received some, of course, from students. So I think there obviously is a lot of controversy. And I would also have to agree, I mean, without saying, discrimination is never okay. But building names were named for what these people did, not what they didn't. They didn't eliminate racism. Did they actively support it? I think that's the open conversation we have to continue to have. And so I want much more information and conversation about this before we move further. I would even go to suggest that we look for a third party, non-University of Minnesota involved to help us review this thing more independently. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. Thank Regent Powell. Any comments from you? Regent Powell. Okay, Regent Omari.
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem, sorry, not at this time.
All right, thank you. Regent Omari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this will be the last comment that I make on this specific piece. I just want to draw a correlation specific to what Regent Rocha mentioned, which is in the March 8th meeting, you stated, I was expecting white hooded brown shirt wearing racist spewing all this vitriol against these people, and quite frankly, I saw administrators struggling with what appears to be a board that was holding to their positions. This mindset, in my opinion, is suggesting that the only way that someone could have been someone who's anti-Semitic was blatantly and outright yelling derogatory terms or documenting things on paper, just as from what I understand your statement to be from March 8th is that the only time someone is racist is if they're attempting to lynch people in white hoods. And I think that is actually part of the problem that we have here right now, actually. And so I just wanted to draw those comparisons and similarities as I see them, which is, again, exactly why we're in the situation that we're in now. I also want to address the board role in this. One, if I'm not mistaken, at the March 8th meeting, Regent Hsu, you brought that same concern up about the board's role being left out, and the presenters actually showed us which page it was on in the report. And so I could be wrong on that as soon as I'm done. Yep. Actually, are you good with him going now? Or do you want me to finish and then let him?
Yes.
It's up to you.
We're going to continue this discussion, but we're getting real close to
Okay, let me just
personalities
wrap
here.
up
We
with
want to
this.
keep on the resolution subject matter, okay?
Yep,
So
let me-
Regent Omari, please, and then Regent Shu.
So I'll just wrap up with, I don't doubt that there's a board dynamic here and that the board was not involved in what was happening. And actually, that furthers my support for unnaming, because if these were men who just simply did what their bosses told them to do, I don't think they deserve to be on our buildings, because that's the highest. And President Kaler, you know I love you, but if you did everything that I told you to do, I would have been trying to call for your termination a long time ago. And so I appreciate that you haven't done everything that I have asked you to do and that you have pushed back. And I would expect that a president and administrators at a university have the agency and the individual thoughts to be able to act in a way that they're not just doing what their bosses told them to do, as we saw with President Ford. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to turn to Regent Shu and Rocha for your final comments, okay? Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Johnson. Regent Omari, first of all, I'm going to respond to what you were asking me about, what I believe you were asking me about. I did bring up one item, one letter that was mentioned in the report, but that was one of many letters that I did not have a chance to bring up. I'm not talking about one letter. Okay? I'm talking about what I believe to be a systematic removal or omitting of board involvement in letters that were either excluded or partially excluded from the report. And that's what I hope to get more information on. Okay, so, but what I will say, since you brought it up, is that I think it's an unreasonable standard to expect President Kaufman to.
He welcomed the Nazi ambassador onto our campus, Shu. Don't you defend him?
Let me just defend him in another way. 'Cause I don't even know about what you're talking about, really. And to me that's, so one of the things that is acknowledged in the report is that it was Kaufman's idea to start the General College. And I didn't know some of this stuff before I started down this road, but one of the most famous alums of the General College was a person by the name of Norman Borlaug. Some people probably don't know who he is, but he got a BS in forestry in 1937, an MS in 1939, a PhD in 1942 in plant pathology. He won the Nobel Prize in 1970, and he's one of the most famous alums of General College. And one of the things that's on our university websites says, more than any other single person of this age, he has helped to provide bread for a hungry world who saved billions of people.
Maybe his name should be on the building.
And I want to say that it's the billions of people are of all colors, probably mostly non-white. And further,
Regent Shu.
just going to wait. So Norman Borlaug, the recipient of the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize for his agricultural research, has reflected. I often think, what would have happened to me if I had not had the chance to enter General College? I was declined entrance to the College of Liberal Arts or to the College of Agriculture. I was thought to be unworthy, incapable of doing university work. My work in advancing the Green Revolution, helping developing countries produce more food, as far as I'm concerned, this work couldn't have happened had I not been given that chance. So when you learn more about Norman Borlaug, you think, well, where would the world be without Norman Borlaug? And then I ask you, where would the world be without Lotus Kaufman if he had quit? If he had decided, if Lotus Kaufman had decided that,
Regent Hsu, wait.
I just want to,
Regent Hsu, just wait. Please proceed, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem. I just want to finish by saying that I think it's an unreasonable standard to say that Lotus Kaufman should have quit if he didn't agree with the Board of Regents in other matters. And I believe that Lotus Kaufman served honorably. He served till he died in office. He may have been able to achieve much more. And I do want to say that I think it's detailed in the report that Lotus Kaufman did try to make the world better, especially in the race issue involving dormitory residency. And I think that the people out here, will eventually have an opportunity to have a discussion with me and others about how there are things that are unknown as of now about what some of these people did to try and further the efforts of people to integrate housing at the university.
Very good. Regent Rocha, you have a brief summary statement, and then we're going to take the vote on the Powell resolution.
Thank you,
Regent
Mr. Chair.
Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to my esteemed colleague's comments about the white hooded, brown shirted racists, and that was mischaracterized in a newspaper article as if that I were saying that that's the only standard we would have to identify somebody who is racist. That's not what I said, nor is it what I meant. And what I said was, as I approached this task force, the report, that's what I was expecting to see. I had a chance to observe in great detail the Campus Divided exhibit well before all of this transpired, and I was heartbroken. I read this and read this about university administrators, and it, I think for all of us, it was very disturbing and disappointing to see that the university had this going on campus and that our leaders held these views. One of the things that stuck out was it referred to Lotus Kaufman as an ardent supporter of segregation. And then there was also talk of, there were the listing of the anti-Semitic terms that were being attributed to Dean Nicholson. What I meant by that comment is when I started to look at, obviously our role is different when we're observing that versus when we're being asked to act on it. And maybe this is just based on my history of different positions I've had in my life where when I get research of that variety and there are citations, I check them, I look at them. I want to know if I'm going to stand up in front of the state and say this is something we have to do, I want to know what the substance of that decision is. And with Kaufman, I found it troubling I couldn't come to the conclusion that he was an ardent supporter of segregation when he was proposing, as he did in working with students that were trying to deal with discrimination against black students, when he said, I've been contemplating, I can't remember the exact verb he used, but contemplating an international house, which I understand is not segregated. Well, you're not a very effective segregationist if you're pursuing something that would not be segregated. It's in the document. It's in the August correspondence.
Regent Rocha, would you come to a summary?
I will. And then secondly, when I spent the time going through the files that were cited as the source of Dean Nicholson having used anti-Semitic language, none of those document. There is no document that verifies that. And so that's what I was saying. I was expecting to see correspondence and documents where in sort of George Wallace fashion, Kaufman was saying that this is the right policy, and that Dean Nicholson was using the language that he was cited as using in the exhibit. I didn't find those things. That's what I meant by that statement. Not that that was a standard that we had to reach before we would ever consider changing the name of a building. And so I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. Thank you.
Very good. The secretary will take the roll on the Powell amendment. Powell resolution.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Cohen.
Yes.
Regent Cohen votes yes. Regent Shue.
No.
Regent Shue votes no. Regent Lucas.
Yes.
Regent Lucas votes yes. Regent Omari.
Yes.
Regent Omari votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
No.
Regent Rocha. Regent Rocha votes no. Regent Simonson.
No.
Regent Simonson votes no. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent McMillan is absent. Chair Pro Tem Johnson.
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Johnson votes yes.
There being 8 ayes and 3 nays, the resolution is adopted. At this time, we'd like to call on Professor Amy Pittenger, Chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee, to the presenters table. Professor? Thank you, Professor, and welcome to the Regents meeting.
Regent Johnson, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to make a statement concerning this important challenge facing the University of Minnesota. The FCC acknowledges that understanding the complexity of the past in order to create a more just future is no small feat. The past few weeks have been very difficult, as I think this meeting demonstrates. We do hope, though, that today marks a return to a place of respectful collaboration between the faculty of the University of Minnesota and the Board of Regents. There is so much we can and must do together. The power of collaboration across the University of Minnesota community is not a theoretical notion. I sat before you right here this past December to provide a testimonial of the positive experience students, staff, alumni, community partners, faculty members, and regents working together towards a common and very important goal as a member of the Presidential Search Advisory Committee. That process wasn't easy, but it was very positive and effective. Even when we strongly disagreed, we can do better because we have done better. We should disagree, question, and challenge each other. This is the only way we come to the best answers and solutions. But our communications must be respectful, or we begin by assuming the best intentions, a willingness to listen with an intent to understand and learn from each other, and being open to changing or adapting our position. I want to again propose an FCC and Provost's Office jointly sponsored forum to provide an opportunity for this type of engagement around this issue that allows and encourages input from across the university community, but also includes the expertise of the historical scholars that we have at this institution regarding the methodology used in this area of research. I'm also restating the faculty's commitment to partner with the Board of Regents to collectively address the complex challenges that face this university. Professor Bowman and I look forward to future meetings with each of you as we continue to foster this important relationship. We're all here because of our commitment to the University of Minnesota and the state that we serve. We are on the same team. We have great aspirations for our university and state, and we will only be able to achieve them by working together. We really do need each other. So thank you for this statement that you just endorsed. On behalf of the FCC, we appreciate the respect and confidence Regents place in the university faculty. as we work together to uphold and enhance the reputation of our world-class Tier 1 research institution. And that concludes my statement.
Professor Pittenger, thank you very much for being with us today, and to you and your colleagues who have and will continue to work on this very important issue. Please express our sincere thanks to your colleagues. President Kaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the board gathering today to discuss this important topic. We left our last meeting divided on many, many issues. In retrospect, I could have slowed the process to have allowed more time for the Regents to provide input and guidance and for the task force to reply to your questions. The reflection and debate that as follows has led me to further think about these issues, and I appreciate the board's statement just made over the core values at stake. I have no doubt our faculty does its work with integrity and in good faith. I also respect the board's proposed naming action. It is contrary to my preliminary recommendation, but it is the board's prerogative to do so, and it is a path forward. Many in our community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, have stopped to ask, what's next and where do we go from here? Some of those answers are becoming more clear today through this statement and through the resolution that will come before you shortly, which I support. I offer another just as critical question that's come since we've last met, and that is, where does the University of Minnesota go from here? I believe we must support each other and learn from each other as a university community to move forward. Once again, I will continue to underscore my support for and trust in our world-class faculty at this institution. I firmly believe members of the task force did exceptional work that reflects the integrity and academic rigor one would expect from an R1 institution. Can questions be asked? Of course. But the answers should be provided and then discussed. That's academic civility. Regardless of support or opposition to renaming, we as a university must find a way to come together and acknowledge past racial discrimination and anti-Semitism that undoubtedly took place on the campus in the 1930s and 40s. We must consider the full meaning and impact of the exhibit, A Campus Divided, in the task force report, and take on a critical analysis of the present and future of the university in light of its less than honorable history. Regardless of renaming, the task force recommended that the university develop public history installations in these buildings. The task force also highlighted an alternative set of initiatives called Beyond Naming at the end of the report. I completely agree with the renewed emphasis on sharing knowledge about our history across the system, understanding it better, learning from it, and acting upon it where appropriate. I strongly encourage the university to come to terms with its history by addressing ongoing issues of fairness and inclusivity now and in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, President Kaler, for your thoughts and remarks. Members of the board, next we have a resolution before us, and in summary declines the president's recommendation to rename Kaufman, Memorial Union, Nicholson Hall, Middlebrook Hall, and Coffee Hall. Is there a motion for the resolution? Is there a motion?
I so move.
There's a motion. Is there a second? It's been moved and second on the second resolution that is before us on the that is printed before you. Questions, discussions? Regent Pisa.
Thank you. We'll describe you as Chair Pro Tem Johnson today. I do want to thank our faculty and others who worked on this project. It's an appropriate topic, and I really recognize the amount of time that it's taken to do the research and writing. I mentioned this in March, that the social and political dynamics of the 1930s have been really glossed over by the university, and we've had sort of a sanitized view of our activity during this complex and changing eras. My comments today are going to be around Kaufman. There's so many directions this could go, but he is central. He's a central player in this period, and he's under whom the other three worked, either for the entire 18 years or for at least a decade. And I don't typically like to do Regent work being in the weeds, but this is a project that rests on words and sentences because there's a scant amount of first-hand information, and so and part of what I'm talking about is for posterity, so that This subject is going to be revisited by our successors potentially, or other buildings, and I want this for the record. So I've got two areas I want to talk about. First is doing research around what the Board of Regents was doing, particularly as it relates to Sheriff Fred Beal Snyder. Mr. Snyder donated boxes of papers that now reside at Anderson Library, but those files were apparently unopened during the research phase of the project. Dr. William Mayo, who served on this board for 32 years, ending in 1939, would have also accumulated private papers, and those would have been helpful in better understanding the prevailing culture of the board and the dynamics of the president on the issue. He and the chair appear to have had a very close relationship. According to my review of the files, I went over there Wednesday. Thank you to our archivist who helped me take a look at that for a few hours. There are also highly regarded public official James Ford Bell, who was CEO of General Mills, was on the board. I also was looking for papers from the activists. I happened to ask for and found Warner Shippey, who was a avowed socialist student activist, World War II conscientious objector, a friend of mine who made a remarkable impact on this university and on St. Paul for many years. His papers are there, so there is more work to be done if someone has that inclination. So after the meeting, as Regent Hsu said, I did go onto our online conservancy and did find the Board of Regents minutes for July 31st, 1935. Talks about the administration wanting to keep Pioneer Hall segregated. I don't think any of us knew that resolution existed. And Dean Coleman, in your March comments, you expressed surprise the board wasn't more active and directive about this issue, given the publicity that it had generated on campus. Well, it turns out the board was engaged. Why is this important? Because the task force builds its case against Kaufman and the other three people around the premise that he and they had the flexibility and authority to go a different direction, and that the board essentially had delegated the matter to the administration. And repeatedly in both the report and the testimony, the presenters maintained that the administrators had power but chose not to exercise it. For example, the report states, quote, "Our investigations in the university archives reveal President Kaufman had the discretion and authority to choose between exclusionary and discriminatory practices in the university or in creating a more equitable university." It goes on to say, quote, "He misrepresented the degree to which he and others adopted or maintained discriminatory practices. This misrepresentation suggests he was aware of alternatives and decided against them," end quote. Now, those are strong statements. In the minutes we now have, the board clearly states that the university's general policy in place since 1851 has been to maintain segregated housing and that it unanimously supports continuation of the policy as it relates to Pioneer. It does make a discretion reference, and this is where Professor Blumenthal's made a comment. But even if he had been so inclined, I question whether he would have had the ability to integrate Pioneer, given that the resolution starts with this guiding principle saying, you know, we're going to maintain the policy since the rocks cooled in 1851. So to me, the language is fuzzy, but I do know that the board was active, and so both the July 31st minutes and the August 1st letter to Ted Christensen of the All University Council on Negro Discrimination confirmed the board was involved in the decision. There's no indication that Kaufman was driving the policy's reaffirmation, or the board could have been perceived as rubber stamping. Maybe he was. It's also interesting to note that the Minneapolis spokesman reported that the All University Council found no other racial discrimination on campus other than the housing matter that we're talking about. Okay, that's the student's word. That's.
Stolen indigenous land. It's all started with discrimination.
I couldn't tell from Professor Blumenthal's presentation whether she was aware of the July 31st memo resolution. It wasn't contained in the documents, as Regent Hsu said, but her comments implied that she had seen the minutes and was her conclusion that the board was essentially ratifying Kaufman's actions. The most telling document that I found was Snyder's letter to then Dean Coffey, that's not Kaufman, of February 1939, when he advised Coffey, go slow on the race problem, take no definite action, give excuses for postponement of action, and let it drag on as long as you can. That's the chair of the Board of Regents directing someone in the administration 2 levels down. So was Coffey pressured by Snyder again later when he becomes president to abandon Ford's edict and to close International House? I'm just raising the questions. I also found a letter from Snyder concerned about socialists and Bolsheviks in the community. What does that mean about his relationship with and influence on Nicholson? Question mark. Snyder is the most powerful figure in the history of the university, maybe only second to his father-in-law, John Pillsbury. He chairs the board continuously for 36 years. World War I, the Depression, World War II, up to 1950, he picks every president from 1920 up through Morrill's finish in 1960. So when the report implies that Kaufman had the ability but lacked the fortitude, I'm struggling with that. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe that could have happened, but it's a stretch for me. Kaufman did advocate for the International, so it was a really, unfortunate sort of there was discrimination on that, obviously. There's letters in the Snyder file from Bernie Bierman, our legendary football coach. Snyder's running communications with the football. I mean, he was a power regent. So maybe Ford was more courageous, as some have asserted, but his letter was more than about 2.5 hours after Kaufman's situation, and campus unrest and activism was increasing, really began to pick up as we approached World War II. And there's the fact that Ford was always an interim president. Maybe he had nothing to lose by doing the right thing, and he did do the right thing. And he apparently wasn't aware of the resolution in 1935. So, and the fact the board passed a resolution in 1935 tells me they thought they were operating legally. Snyder's a lawyer. He had sued Chase, who was the guy who apparently was feeding information to Nicholson. Snyder sues Chase. We win on autonomy issues. And anyway, Snyder would have known whether the legality of this policy would have crossed his mind. Then there's a letter to the Minnesota Jewish Council, the Vice President Middlebrook, complimenting him on his commitment to social justice reform. That letter never got in the file because we didn't reach out to those family members. And that's an important document. That man served for 4 decades. And somebody made the effort to write a letter from the Minnesota Jewish Council about his work on improving. The second major issue I've got with this is the weight the task force places on contextual issues. And I'm not criticizing Professor Blumenthal. This is a judgment. How much weight do you give? Some people say, I'm giving no weight at all to those times because discrimination is discrimination. I get that. Others would sort of apologize to these people 100%. Here's how I think about Kaufman. This is my lens. Was he a racist by today's standards? Yes. Did Kaufman or the Board of Regents provide leadership that others at similar northern universities found the courage to exercise? No. Did a majority of Big Ten universities have integrated housing? No. Did Kaufman hold extreme racial views for someone of his generation more than the 1870s? No. Was Kaufman in the general mainstream of thought in the 1930s? Yes. Was the Twin Cities community segregated and redlined? Yes. Did Kaufman generally attempt to keep African Americans or Jews out of the university? No. Was there evidence of other discrimination on campus? No. Was this historic civil rights movement? Yes. Was this historic civil rights movement in its early infancy? Yes. Was the university generally more progressive and tolerant than the state that it served? Yes. No. Was Kaufman more aggressive than the board in attempting to construct International House? Yes. There's also a letter in the file, if I could finish. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Regent
I'm sorry.
Regent Beeson, just hold a minute. Just hold.
We ask for respect from the board.
Regent Beeson,
Thank you.
could
Thank
you
Mr. Chair.
come to a conclusion?
And this is amateur history, and look how you're behaving. You're a normal racist from your time.
Regent Beeson, seated behind me is Professor John Wright, whose
Ma'am?
and father
Ma'am?
were on the
Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, Snyder's files contain a letter dated April 4th, 1936 from Kaufman to University of Minnesota alumni.
Was under Kaufman. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to finish up here shortly. Also, Snyder's files contain, again, these are files that were never looked at. Contain a letter dated April 4th, 1936.
People's Mike, John Wright, speak.
Regent Beeson, I will call on you again. Let's just turn to Regent Lucas for a moment, okay? Just Regent
Who
Lucas.
wants John Wright to speak?
We'll call this meeting to order. You have 2 minutes in which to sit down and be respectful of this board, or we'll ask you be removed. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and you will be removed from the board meeting.
Do it. If you remove him, do you know how that will look?
Why is there no comment from the faculty members and students who are here in this room who can answer every one of the misstatements that these board members have said about the scholarship they're going to get?
It's curious that you mentioned the inequality in this boardroom, yet you're not letting us speak. Just saying it is not enough.
You have 1 minute.
Let him speak. Surround him. Prevent any arrests from happening. Surround him.
Board members, we will take a 5-minute recess, and we ask law enforcement to remove them. 5-minute recess.
The faculty is... Forum is this? When all the regents talk to each other and tell untruths.
I want to hear John speak.
Me too.
Mr. Chairman,
I'd like to make a suggestion slash motion that we adjourn for a short time and then come back and allow the public to take time to speak on the matter.
Bye, Shoe!
You're a coward.
Come on, let's hear an answer to that.
Talk to me. Listen to Amari.
Stay here and listen.
That's the right move.
And I'd also make a motion that nobody gets arrested.
We're not in session.
Yeah, we're in recess.
So we're in recess right now? So then when we get back, then I'll make the motion that we allow the public to comment. How long is our recess?
5 minutes. We only got 3.5 left.
Yeah, everybody stay.
Yeah.
Regent Rocha, you called for greater dialogue. You should be the one making that motion.
I'm still here, Chief.
We're in recess, but despite that, I have a suggestion, a respectful suggestion. When we come back together, I would offer two of you pick two of you to come and address the board, each for no longer than 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes, and tell your story, where you see the errors and where you support us and whatever. But 2 minutes, two of you for 5 minutes each. But I would ask as part of that it be done in a respectful way, both from the board and from the audience.
10 minutes for John Wright.
Is that okay?
We agree to that, but also in a respectful way. You agree?
We all give our minutes to John Wright for 10 minutes.
Okay, is that agreeable?
Yes.
All right, with the rest of you then kindly take your seats, and we'll listen to is it Mr. Rice?
Professor Rice.
Do you even know who he is? Do you know who he is? Do you know who he is?
I do.
Okay. Show some respect.
Would you honor the invitation we just presented?
Yes, gladly.
Okay, would the rest of you please take your seats?
Do you want us to sit or stand here?
I'm fine either way.
Do you mind if we have to? Can we stand here? Is it a big deal if we agree to let?
It's just more conducive to listening and discussion and order, okay? I would just respectfully ask that he speak.
We will sit after he's done speaking.
Yes.
Okay, you're ready? Okay, we'll reconvene, and you have 10 minutes in which to present your.
We're going to reconvene, and we're going to proceed now.
Yeah, would you please use the microphone? That's easier for everyone to hear, please. Okay, welcome, Professor Wright. Please.
Thank you very much. This is an extraordinary occasion for me on multiple grounds. One, in part, because I'm in the very last weeks of over 35 years on the faculty of this university, preceded by a decade as a student, an undergraduate and graduate student here from 1963 to 1973. I've been on the faculty since 1984. But I'm part of a family lineage that has ties to this university. I go back to 1901, when my grandfather, for whom I am named, engaged in a debate in Bethesda Baptist Church here in the Elliott Park neighborhood of Minneapolis with 3 black law graduates of the law school of the University of Minnesota on an issue of moment to the African American community at the time. And the issue that they debated, and they used formal debate procedures in this regard, 2 teams on each side of the issue to be debated, a panel of professional judges, including other university-trained and legal and theological scholars elsewhere. The question they were debating was whether or not the health, welfare, and prosperity of the African American community of this country might be best served by the creation of an independent black commonwealth within the United States. My grandfather and Harvey Burke, again, who graduated from the University Law School in 1908, argued for the affirmative. And McCant Stewart and Joseph Reed, who also, again, were graduates of the University Law School, argued in the negative. The debate judges agreed that my grandfather and Harvey Burke had won the debate in formal terms. The audience sided with the negatives in that regard. The ties between the African American community and this university, again, are long on multiple levels. It's a rich and very complex and conflictual history. I've had the pleasure and sometimes the pain to be involved with it for over 3 generations. And it in part overlaps and exceeds the era of Lotus Kaufman, again, the longest serving university president here, from 1920 to 1938. My aunt and my father were members of the very first black student organization on this campus, the Council of Negro Students, which began in 1936 here and which organized primarily to resist the policies that President Kaufman and his deans and other administrators put in place to essentially create a Jim Crow set of policies for the interaction of the races on this campus. My aunt had graduated as the valedictorian of North High, class of 1934. Had skipped 2 grades, was a brilliant mathematician, and who entered this university in what was then called the School of Technology, which would later become the Institute of Technology that I would enter as a freshman in 1963. She was one then of only 5 or 6 women students in the School of Technology and the only African-American student. She would become one of the presidents of the Council of Negro Students, who addressed the issues, again, of the Kaufman administration. They do indeed precede the era of the campus divided exhibit that Professor Revell and Prell so masterfully orchestrated, but which goes from 1930 to 1942. I was one of the faculty advisors on that exhibit and was proud to do so. But 15 years before the campus divided exhibit, in part as a member of the reunion committee of the Morrill Hall Takeover Group, the Afro-American Action Committee, who had occupied Morrill Hall in 1969, we had come together again some 30-some years later to address where we were and where the university was after the passage of more than 35 years. One of the things that had not happened was any institutional grappling, again, with the African-American presence on this community over those many years. As a consequence, one of the projects we began, we created a coalition for the study of African-American contributions to the University of Minnesota. It resulted in part in a 3-part series published in the Minnesota Alumni Magazine in 2002 to 2003. It was divided into 3 sections. The first section went from the late 19th century through the World War I era up to 1920. The second section focused on 1920 to 1941, the era, again, that the campus divided exhibit deals with. The third section focused on the 1950s through the era of the Morrill Hall takeover. In that context, the second section was the first narrative we know, indeed, about the Kaufman administration's Jim Crow policies, the attempts to use Plessy versus Ferguson basically as a legal foundation for Jim Crow policies on campus. We laid that out in some detail in that context, but it had no broad audience. It had no broad audience, I'm afraid. It would take the passage of some time and the broader context in which the campus divided exhibit appeared, that is the Craig Stephen Wilder book, Ebony and Ivy, which began to deal, again, with the implication of American higher education with slavery and racism on a historic basis. The movement around that spread around this country. and beginning with the higher education institutions, the Ivy League schools, Brown and Yale and Harvard and Dartmouth and Duke and so on and so forth, eventually that movement to reassess institutional history reached us. We're late in the process of beginning to grapple with our institutional history and the issues of moral culpability of the administrators involved in university policies and practices, official and unofficial. And much of what we're talking about here in this context is unofficial. We're just beginning to grapple with it. I think it's a marvelous educational opportunity for our students to wrestle with the meanings of public history, with all the myriad forces at work, psychological, political, and otherwise, in human relations, whether it's on campuses or off, and on the role of officials responsible for the conduct, again, of higher education, training of young people. One of the things that the Campus Divided exhibit generated, of course, was the issue of the culpability of the 4 administrators, all right, whose names are on the buildings unquestioned here. One of the ironies, and that, again, I served on Dean Coleman's preliminary committee before the task force was formed, to at least set the stage for this broadband enterprise. But one of the things that came out in the process, in terms of building names and issues of naming, Lois Kaufman himself did not believe in naming buildings after people. He believed that they ought to have functional names. So to some extent, in his case at least, we're engaged in a kind of a strangely ironic enterprise, all right, in opposition to his own expressed and documented preferences. But the issue of his culpability here goes beyond that of the Regents' statement of 1935. One of the primary sources for understanding the issues we're dealing with right now has been on the periphery of all of the institutional efforts to deal with the history of race relations on this campus, and that is the voices, the experiences, documented and otherwise, of people of color, African Americans in particular. The single best source of information on African American life on this campus, on the policies of the university administration, of the positions of the Regents and so forth, is not in the university archives. It's in the archives of the black press, of the 8 to 10 different African American newspapers and magazines from the late 19th century onward, who's devoted great energy to dealing with these issues, in part because higher education was a central concern for African American communities. It was one of the major tools to battle the forces of white supremacy at large, institutionalized racism, and so forth. Black press paid immense attention to higher education. If you go to the Historical Society and pull out the index of black newspapers, and only a partial index still exists, there's a listing of at least 150 items about the University of Minnesota, not just in the Minneapolis Spokesman, which was alluded to here, but in the Western Appeal, and John Quincy Adams' Western Appeal, in the Twin City Herald. I could go on and on and on. And the portrait of life on this campus and the university policies that would come out of a close examination of those workings of the black press, those primary source stuff. Well, the advisory task report here is gentle by comparison. Is gentle by comparison. In the case of Lois Kaufman, hinging his moral culpability and the institutional integrity on the 1935 Regents' statement that presumably makes him simply a servant of their broader wishes, looking back just a decade, these issues were there and being dealt with in the black press in 1925. And there are no Board of Regents resolutions or support for Kaufman's actions and documented resistance to black students living in the dormitories in 1925. So there's a great deal of work to be done in this regard. And some of the commentary that I've seen stemming from the press or comments of the Regents, accurate or otherwise, about these things, the fear about erasing history. The history of Lois Kaufman and Nicholson and Coffey and the other is not going to be erased. That's not what ultimately is at issue. It's the issue of honor and institutional integrity. And no one has a permanent lease on honor. Every day we're dealing with not just on campuses, but in the country at large, with peoples whose past has come back to haunt them. People who have been in positions of honor in public life and higher education and elsewhere. All right? But who, when the truth about the deeds of the past, are no longer deserving of a place of honor, of enduring place of honor. That's what the bottom issue is here, in terms of this business about naming. I'm one who, again, as an advisor to Dean Coleman's report, argued very strongly that the real emphasis ultimately has to be going beyond naming to all those issues in the present that have led student groups and people from off campus to stage protests on this campus, to try to sit in President Kaler's office, and so on. And these from students who may have very little understanding of our institutional history, but who are dealing with the issues of now and the present. And so that issue is where ultimately all this has to go. At the same time that we have an obligation, if we are seriously interested in the values and virtues of higher education, and helping students understand, all right, critical thinking, the processes of historical research and investigation and interpretation. One of the early homilies that I picked up about history was attributed to Mark Twain, and its source, I think, remains in dispute and so forth. There was the notion that history may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. History may not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And we may not be repeating history here today, all right? But there certainly are rhymes here from the issues of this institution and its inability to deal with its history from the past, from 80 years ago. The questions about the anti-Semitism and Jim Crow policies on this campus have been known in the African American and Jewish communities in this region for 80 years. These things were front page stories in the black press. But in part because this institution, the larger society, conspired to keep black folks, as Ralph Ellison would say, invisible. And their voices and attitudes and outlooks and deep faith in democracy, in educational democracy. All right? One of the things that W.B. Du Bois argued very early on, amongst the gifts that black folks have given America, is a vision of democracy greater than that the so-called founding fathers articulated, beyond what they could conceive. And the struggle to extend democracy and a vision of democracy has always been the core issues in this country. The health of our democracy now and in the future depends on it. So regardless of what the board decides in this regard, I think we've accomplished a great deal. All right? The Campus Divide exhibit did more than we were able to do 15 years earlier with the history of the black presence on this campus. And now, the conspiracy of silence that's kept this institutional history out of mind and out of the province of our institutional policies and practices, that's over. These documents are now global property, global intellectual properties. And regardless of what this board decides, we will continue to wrestle with these things on into the future. So I hope, again, that those regents who want to pursue their own investigative enterprises, all right, is either in counterpoint or complements to the heroic work of the task force here, will do so in this kind of spirit, and in a way that will provide us with some new sources of honor going forward, as we try to grapple again with a past that is and will remain contentious, tumultuous, and never a static backdrop. So I know I've exceeded my 10 minutes, but perhaps that you just offer one. One of the things I'm doing here, I'm speaking again for generations of African Americans, all right, for whom the policies of the Kaufman era provided a chilling effect to this institution, and that drove many, many black families, hundreds, perhaps thousands of black families, to not send their children to this state-supported public land-grant university, but to send them instead to the historically black colleges and universities of the South, to elsewhere in the east or north or so on. All right? The faith, African American community's faith in education, the power of education, is legendary in that regard. And black parents wanted to send their children to this university to be educated, not to be isolated, not to be segregated, not to be humiliated or insulted, as those policies did. So, I grew up hearing stories from my parents, from their peers, again, who were here in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s. I was too young, again, to have a sophisticated grasp of those things. It's taken, again, my own maturation and my own professional work as a scholar to give me some new perspectives on all of that. And I think, again, there's much to be shared, and I hope going forward, again, whatever this board decides here, that we will have a constructive and a collaborative step forward into the future. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Wright, and for the respect of all of you during the presentation. Regent Lucas.
Thank you. I think. Timing is everything. I wrote this before this speech from Dr. Wright, but I think I wrote what was in my heart. So,
Regent Lucas, can you speak closer to the mic, please? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I was introduced to this issue when I toured a campus divided at Anderson Library. I was so moved that I organized a group of neighbors to come and see it. I remember looking at the hundreds of Post-its left by others and even considered leaving one myself. I definitely felt that there needed to be appropriate follow-up. The exhibit uploaded for me an awareness of the overall sad injustices of Minnesota in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. I read the report of the task force and found it to be balanced and informative, carefully reporting on both the achievements and the shortcomings of campus leaders whose buildings' names we are considering today. I attended a program on mapping prejudice, which documented how Minneapolis was segregated by zoning laws. I remember when my company purchased a piece of land in South Minneapolis, and it came with language in the title that prohibited sale to anyone of Asian extraction. I also heard my colleague Regent Cohen tell us that Jews were prohibited from joining AAA. These are all shocking realizations. After much thought, I came to the conclusion that renaming the buildings was the easy answer. Once they were renamed, how would the story live on? More important was to tell the story of the time and history in depth and show how the university took part in it. Not only should we provide a balanced view of the achievements and shortcomings of the people with named buildings, but it should look in depth at the ways we can begin to achieve reckoning for the damage done at that time. It should look at expanding the story to cover Ford Hall and Pioneer Hall. I feel that ironically, some of the reckoning has begun by the fact that second floor Kaufman is now the diversity hub, and the Jewish Studies program is housed at Nicholson Hall. There's much more that can be done, and this should be the focus going forward. I met with student leaders yesterday to hear their perspective and why they believe the building should be renamed. They were articulate and thoughtful. They asked us to put ourselves in the place of minority students today who have to learn of the painful history of these buildings and wonder why the names were left to stand. It was compelling, and although I did not change my mind about renamings, it underlined for me the importance of a deep dive into the shameful story of the times and the part the university played. It challenged me to think about what the university can do by way of reckoning. There's no doubt that students should be part of the process. I would like to close by saying that I have been saddened and sometimes outraged by some of the things I've read in the paper that my fellow regents have said about the process. That's hard to say. I believe that although there's more to learn, the effort so far has been a good one, and that we should be grateful to all those who have brought these issues to light. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. Regent Omari?
Thank you, Chair Johnson, and thank you to Professor Wright, someone that I've called on many times throughout the years for guidance. I just add, I'm good. I'm good.
Further discussion on the resolution that is before us. Further discussion. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just, it's been so long. So the motion before us right now is the
motion before us is the second resolution, which is it simply says this. Now therefore be it resolved, the Board of Regents declines the recommendations to remove the names of Coffee Hall, Kaufman Memorial Union, Middlebrook Hall, and Nicholson Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may continue. Thank you, Professor Wright. That was worth the price of admission, I think, for everyone in the room, and I regret that even though our times overlapped, I did not have a class with you during my time as a student. As it relates to this motion, as I stated at the outset, I don't think this motion is timely. And I accept the appeal or the entreaty by Professor Wright to continue the dialogue. Much of the material cited by my colleague, Regent Lucas, with her very thoughtful commentary about what's been in the media has been, I think, from some of us, a frustration about the fact that we haven't had that opportunity to have that dialogue. And I'm looking forward to that. The challenge with this motion on the floor at this time is that to vote against it may carry the unintended implication that you believe the standard has been met before we've had that full dialogue. But then to vote for it would suggest that it's a closed question, and it's not for me. I intend to continue this conversation, and I'm going to vote for the motion for two reasons. One, I don't believe the standard's been met yet, and look forward to the continuing conversation. And then secondly, from a parliamentary standpoint, were the case to be made and rise to the level necessary, I'd be in a position to move for reconsideration or to seek another alternative at that time. So I'm going to support it. But I don't believe that, based on where we are in the conversation, it's ripe for consideration. Thank you.
Regent Hsu, did you have a comment? Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem. I do have a question. I want to thank Professor Wright. That was very informative, and I think it was very appropriate for us to hear that today. Unfortunately, I don't really understand how we got here. Why are we having this meeting to vote down the renaming? I'd like someone to explain that to me. And if someone could explain, I mean, the chair isn't here. Obviously, the chair called the meeting. He's not here to explain why we're doing this today and not waiting until we get more information or for May or whatever. But if someone could answer that, I would appreciate it.
Mr. President.
Mr. Chair Pro Tem, again, the chair and the vice chair is on the phone, perhaps can provide that perspective too, but I believe the feeling was that the community is roiling a bit, more than a bit, around this issue. It's been divisive. Hard things have been said. People's reputations have been attacked. And the chair and vice chair, and I agree, thought that bringing a closure to the issues around the faculty's integrity and academic skills, while continuing the dialogue around our history, was the right thing to do, and to do it sooner rather than later was the right thing to do. But the Vice Chair may have a different opinion.
Regent Powell?
Sorry, Chair Pro Tem, I was muted. No, I think President Kaler has framed it well. I mean, it is a divisive issue. Regents have been very strongly engaged on this issue and in the debate, and we just felt that it was time to attempt to bring some closure to the debate, and that's why we pushed to have the meeting now.
Regent Hsu?
So, Mr. Chair Pro Tem, thank you, and thank you, Vice Chair, thank you, Mr. President. Over the course of these last 2 months, I have actually offered to engage with people who wanted to discuss this topic, and I asked the board office to facilitate that, and nothing happened, and now I understand why. I'm disappointed that we didn't have more opportunity to engage in civil discourse, conversations, whatever. I mean, I've had people contact me, but having one-on-one conversations just doesn't work for this kind of topic. And and I've had those with students and faculty members, and I feel that we're in a position now where actually the right thing to do would be to table this voting down of the renaming until such time that we can actually do what I was suggesting earlier, which is put an actual process with standards in place, which I think is maybe partly what one of the other resolutions is going to try and do. But I would just offer that if anybody here has an interest. I'm not going to make the motion, but if anybody has a similar concern and similar desire to table this, I would second.
Regent Hsu, are you making a motion to table, or you're looking for
I might as well, right? I'm going to motion. I'm going to motion to table this, or possibly send it to a committee, another committee of the board, such as the governance committee, which is really where I think it should have been.
You really have two thoughts, Regent Hsu. Table is one thing, re-refer to a committee is another.
Well, see, I hadn't thought this through, so that's why I have two. I'll start with table.
Okay, there's a motion to table resolution number 2. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Mr. Chair.
Regent Rocha.
Just a point of order, is tabling, is that the proper, Mr. Langworthy, is that the appropriate use of a tabling, or should it be a postponement?
Tabling is simply to table it, and the motion does not ask for a time certain to revisit it. His motion was simply to table the issue, table the resolution. He did not say, Regent Hsu did not say, I table it until. Simply table, and I might inform the board that tabling is non-debatable issue.
Can we comment, Mr. Chair?
No, you cannot.
And can I comment now before the second is made?
We need to have a second before we have discussion.
Oh, we can't discuss.
No, we need a second. Under the rules, there is a motion. We are looking for a second.
Regent Omari. Mr. Chair.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Omari, I'm inclined to second it for the
Regent Rocha?
For the purposes, but I'm not going to, so you can talk, and then when you're done, we'll maybe revisit. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're on the main motion, so.
We're on the motion. We need a second.
I can't comment before the motion.
No,
well, he's waiting on a second.
Somebody's second.
I can't comment before or after.
We need a second to the motion, or it dies.
It looks like I do not have a second, so I will withdraw.
Okay, Regent Hsu withdraws, and so we're back to the original motion, resolution number 2, but which is before us on the namings. That is before us at the present time.
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swiggum, please.
Mr. Chairman, I almost hesitate to speak after the great presentation by Professor Wright. But I will, just because I've always had a little more guts than brains, I guess. Regents, members of the body, there will never be a Swigum Hall. Never. I'm not a good enough person. I have all kinds of failings in my life. I don't think there's going to be a Johnson Hall either, by the way, Mr. Chairman.
Regent Swigum, there already is. Well, it's not spelled exactly right, but we'll fix that later. Regent Swigum, please continue.
Well, there's certainly not going to be a Swigum Hall. I have nothing but significant problems and failings in my life. I also feel, sitting here, I'm not good enough of a person to judge 4 persons who gave significant service, significant time in their lives to the University of Minnesota, some of which grandchildren and children are sitting in the audience today. I have 3 pages of notes. I'm going to spare you 3 pages. I'm just going to mention one thing because it's been brought up here today 2 or 3 times and some comments from the audience about it, and that is in regards to President Kaufman. And I honor the task force report that tried to be somewhat balanced in the findings and recommendations. And in the findings and recommendations of President Kaufman, they gave great kudos to President Kaufman for starting General College. I know it was mentioned by a couple of my friends over there. It was mentioned by a couple of people in the audience. Out of full disclosure, members, because certainly it will be disclosed at one time or another, in a former life, I strongly encouraged President Brunix to close General College. I strongly encouraged President Brunix to come forward with performance measures for this university, including freshman retention, including students that graduate and get jobs in their field of study, including increases in the ACT scores, including students that graduate in 4 or maybe 5 years. I'm heavy on performance, as all of you know. But I do not believe the university can be or should be everything to everybody. I don't think that that's the role of the university, to be everything to everybody. And certainly President Brunix, and I don't believe any of the members of this current Board of Regents were there in 1905 when President from General College. You were there?
No, sorry, go ahead.
When General College was closed. But it's been mentioned a couple of times, and I'm sure that I have some letters and or discussions, and it's maybe in President Brunix's file, that I spoke to him a couple, 3 times when he visited me in my office about General College. And if it was a positive for President, as related in the task force report for President Brunix, or for President Kaufman, for President Kaufman to have started General College because of the outreach and the enhancement of diversity, obviously President Brunix and I would, and the Board of Regents in 1905 or 2005 would stand subject to some criticism for having a closed General College. But I stand here today and tell you it was the right thing to do, no matter what friends on the board or others in the audience would say. And thank you for that. I'll spare you the other 2.5 pages.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. We're going to come to a vote now on the resolution. Just a couple of thoughts. One is, Professor Wright, thank you for your historical perspective of this issue, along with those who are in attendance. But I want you to know that this board is not just going to put this issue on the shelf and say, well, we had a debate for 2-3 hours. You have brought attention to the matter of extreme importance to this university and to this state. And there's much dialogue and many meetings left to be held over this issue. And so we thank you for that. So with that, Mr. Steves, would you please take the roll call vote on resolution number 2?
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Cohen.
Yes.
Regent Cohen votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Lucas.
Yes.
Regent Lucas votes yes. Regent Omari.
No.
Regent Omari votes no. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent McMillan is absent. Chair Pro Tem Johnson.
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Johnson votes yes.
There being 10 ayes and 1 nay, the motion prevails. Thank you very much. We've now moved to our last resolution before us. Let me briefly explain what the resolution number 3 entails. 3 items. First, it directs the president to develop in consultation with the board ongoing commemorations, educational activities, and/or permanent educational displays that reflect the university's complex institutional history in relation to the 4 buildings. 2, consider and recommend to the board additional commemorations, educational activities, or markers across the system. And finally, recommend revisions to Board of Regents policy, namings that establish clear principles and procedures to guide future discussions on this topic. Is there a motion for this resolution?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and second. Members, discussion. Members, Regent Anderson.
I was going to speak before thank you, Chair. I was going to speak before the last vote, but it doesn't really matter. But I just want the public to know, and I've spoke on this before, judgment, especially of other human beings, is very difficult for me. It's very difficult. I've been quiet on the subject, but it's not that I haven't done my research, not that I haven't visited with a ton of people. Professor Wright, I really, really appreciate your words. I'm going to say something about that in a minute. But, you know, I come from western Minnesota, but we have, call it what you will, but we have somewhat our own way of life. And I was raised that way. But I will also tell you, and this goes to Professor Wright's talk about moving forward. I've sat next to Regent Omari for 4 years, and Regent Omari was brought up a lot different than I was. But we became great friends, fair to say? And if that can happen, it can continue to happen here. You know, my life, I've worked as a funeral director, and people have problems with what I call grief relief. And I always used to tell them, today, put your right foot in front of your left foot, and then your left foot in front of your right foot, and then your right foot in front, and you just continue that pattern, and it eventually gets you to the promised land. I think that's where the University of Minnesota has to go. We have to work putting one foot in front of the other and keep doing that until we get better at what we do. This has not been an easy process. I thank all of you for attending, letting us know what you felt. But if it's been difficult for you, understand it's been difficult for us. You may not like the way I voted. I have to live with that. But that's where we're at. And I guess I just wanted a chance to say something, Chair Johnson, so I'm done.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Anderson. On the resolution number 3, further comments? Further comments? Regent Omari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief and just note that several of these points in the 3rd resolution are also in line with what the original task force recommendations were. Secondly, I just say as we think about the namings around principles and procedures, we revisit the original committee that was chaired by Coleman because they spent a lot of time on that, and we can learn from the work that's already been done. And then thirdly, as I've said many times, and we just had an exhibit from Professor Wright, we must not only talk to the families of those whose names are on the buildings, and I see Mr. Middlebrook's grandson here, Chris Middlebrook, who I declined to meet with because I had not met with enough members of the families that have been discriminated against. I charged this board and asked that you all spend as much energy and time with both sides of this conversation as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Samari, for your comment. Further comments, discussion on resolution number 3? If not, the secretary will take the roll.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Cohen.
Yes.
Regent Cohen votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Lucas.
Yes.
Regent Lucas votes yes. Regent Omari.
Yes.
Regent Omari votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Regent Powell votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent McMillan is absent. Chair Pro Tem Johnson.
Yes.
Chair Pro Tem Johnson votes yes.
There be 11 ayes and 0 nays. The resolution is adopted. I would entertain a motion for adjournment. It's been moved and second. All in favor say aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.